60 Minutes, Rewind.
In the blood-soaked world of international drug cartels, for the top cops of U.S. law enforcement, Joaquin Guzman was public enemy number one, a title not bestowed on anyone since the gangster era of Al Capone and John Dillinger. He earned that status by putting more narcotics on American streets than anyone in history. Guzman, known by the nickname El Chapo, Spanish for Shorty, gained an outsized reputation. He bribed his way out of a Mexican prison in 2001, and for the next 13 years, he used money, violence, and gee-whiz escapes worthy of a James Bond villain to avoid capture. A myth grew that he was untouchable. But tonight we will show you how in February Chapo was finally caught. After the death of Osama bin Laden, El Chapo became the most wanted man in the world.
So getting him was a big deal for you.
Absolutely. In my world, it was like winning the Super Bowl, winning the World Series. This was the actual trophy.
He was number one?
Absolutely.
This fight against drugs...
Derek Maltz was in charge of the DEA's Special Operations Division, tasked with finding Chapo.
What put him at the top of the list?
Making billions of dollars, having a reach around the world, in Asia, in Australia, in Africa, in Europe, putting poison on the streets, not just in the United States, but all over the world.
Jim Dinkins was head of Homeland Security investigations. He pursued El Chapo for more than a decade.
He's a monster that happened to rise up in a criminal organization that was making billions of dollars.
A monster.
A monster.
Until both men retired in recent months, Dinkins and Maltz helped coordinate the U.S. hunt for Chapo. His real name, Joaquin Guzman. Incredibly, Guzman was on the Forbes magazine list of billionaires. He was also known to be one of the most violent drug traffickers in the world. As his Sinaloa cartel fought to dominate the drug trade, the war between the cartels turned the southern side of the U.S.-Mexico border into one of the most dangerous places on earth.
Thousands of people electrocuted, beheaded, chopping off limbs, throwing people in acid. He committed some ruthless crimes in Mexico.
He's in custody now and doesn't look quite so ferocious, cowed, his head bowed. But until he was apprehended by Mexican Marines, Joaquin Guzman, the illiterate son of a farmer, ran a multinational criminal empire.
They had not only transportation, they had manufacturing, they had domestic and local distribution channels.
Very sophisticated with narco subs, with shipping vessels, with 747s, with private vessels, with tractor-trailers, rail cars. The drug cartel was run like a Fortune 500 company.
He employed some very sophisticated counterintelligence operations to make sure that if law enforcement was getting close, they would never actually get to him.
Chapo devised ingenious smuggling methods.
Marihuana, huh?
He packed drugs into fake cucumbers and bananas and mixed them with shipments of real produce. But the thing he worked hardest on was making sure he could always get away. Chapo was the first Mexican drug trafficker to hire architects and engineers to build elaborate tunnels, complete with railways to ferry drugs under the U.S.-Mexico border. And he spent millions adapting them to use as escape routes from his many hideouts.
This is very tight, very hot, very close.
We went down into a labyrinth of interlocking tunnels with the Mexican Marines who chased him.
Unbelievable.
This was one of the ways Chapo was able to elude capture time and time again. The Americans thought he was being tipped off by corrupt Mexican officials, but the Mexicans bristled at the accusation they could not be trusted.
So there were suspicions on both sides of the border.
Absolutely, yes.
So what was different this time?
The U.S. government and the Mexican government basically said enough is enough. And we actually, rolled up our sleeves, got in a room, argued a little bit, put all the intelligence on the table, shared it with the Mexicans, and ultimately grabbed Chapo.
It started with a routine smuggling probe by Homeland Security investigators at the border crossing in Nogales, Arizona. A wiretap unexpectedly led to a phone linked to one of Chapo's men. U.S. agents followed that thread for more than 2 years.
Worked it from phone to phone, device to device, person to person, until they actually had wired out the communication structure. And the communication structure was the key. It was a very clear picture to us on what was happening and how he was running his business.
Several U.S. law enforcement agencies, the DEA, the Marshals, Homeland Security, and the FBI, were all pursuing Guzman separately. But this time, they decided to streamline their efforts and funnel everything through the DEA.
And we had one voice in how we were going to pursue sharing intelligence with the Mexican officials.
Was that significant, that important to have that one voice?
Absolutely. You can't do a job against Chapo Guzman unless you're working together.
And Tomas Zerón was that voice on the Mexican side.
Atención!
Zerón is chief of the investigative agency of the Prosecutor General of the Republic, Mexico's version of the FBI.
The main U.S. assistance was surveillance, wiretapping, phone surveillance, and that sort of thing?
Yo lo englobaría en tecnología.
I will just tell you they help us with technology, because they're really good in technology, and that will encapsulate everything.
Zerón, in turn, tapped the Mexican Marines to execute the plan. They are elite special forces, highly trained and known for using deadly force. We watched one of their training sessions, an assault on a mock-up of a cartel hideout. And we traveled with the Marines to Sinaloa, a remote state on the Pacific coast, and to its capital, Culiacan, Chapo's base of operations where his cartel still rules. It was here in Culiacan on February 12th, after weeks of secret surveillance, the Marines started to move on the cartel, rounding up Chapo's henchmen, who started to talk.
There was a lot of close associates of Chapo that were arrested over these periods of time, and there was information developed that was provided to the Mexicans. So it wasn't just technical information, bank information, surveillance information, documents, telephone information.
Based on intelligence collected on both sides of the border, Marines raided a series of cartel safe houses on February 17th. They seized more than 3 tons of crystal meth and cocaine, automatic weapons and ammunition, a rocket launcher, and a diamond-encrusted pistol with the initials of Joaquin Guzman. They also arrested one of Chapo's top lieutenants, a man called the Nose, and he flipped quickly. He told them where Chapo was hiding and how he planned to escape. Several weeks later, the Marines took us to the place where they were told Chapo was hiding. This nondescript house in the midst of a middle-class neighborhood was a fortress. They had to ram their way through a reinforced steel door.
It took you 8 minutes to open the door? Ocho minutos.
When they got inside, El Chapo was nowhere to be found, but they did find this.
The tub. Look at this. The escape hatch.
The bathtub was equipped with a hydraulic lift. It's been turned off.
Very steep. He couldn't have done this quickly.
But underneath is the entranceway to a hidden tunnel.
While Marines were battering down the front door, they say Guzman, startled, barefoot, in his underwear, clambered down these stairs and escaped through this tunnel with his bodyguard and 2 women.
This was part of a maze of tunnels connected to the city sewers of Culiacan, and it turns out to 6 other safe houses, all equipped with hydraulically controlled bathtub escape hatches. Our guide told us that even though they had a 10-minute head start, he could hear the fugitives splashing through the water, but they were too far ahead to catch. When the Marines emerged from this spillway by the river, El Chapo had vanished.
So what did you think when he got away once again in Culiacan?
I never believed that he would ever be captured.
Really?
I thought he was gone again. I thought he may have been, tipped off.
But the Mexican Marines just were relentless, and they went from house through the tunnels, from tunnel to house, from house, and they just kept on going.
Chapo and his wife, a one-time beauty queen, their twin toddlers, a nanny, a cook, and his most trusted bodyguard were desperately trying to shake the Marines off their trail. They ditched their phones and got new numbers.
He's a man on the run. You need money, you need food, you need weapons. And he was also very interested in knowing who had been arrested, I'm sure, and what was going on. So it was very hard for him to go into isolation, complete isolation.
How is he communicating at this point?
I'm sure multiple different ways, but the ways that, that were the most vulnerable was back on cell phones.
So he's back using the cell phones.
Back using cell phones, and you can't, now you're on the run, so how they're gonna know what number to call? You have to tell them, all right, well, I got a new phone number, here it is. Well, you just told us to.
5 days later, the Americans traced the phone of Chapo's bodyguard to the resort city of Mazatlan, 136 miles away, and to this beachfront building. They shared that intelligence with the Mexicans. At exactly 6:40 a.m. on February 22nd, the Marines crashed through the door of number 401. When he saw the red beads of their laser sights speckled on his chest, the bodyguard threw down his rifle and threw up his hands. Next, the Marines burst through the door of the master bedroom, where Chapo's wife stood naked by the bed. A Marine pushed past her and kicked in the bathroom door. There was somebody behind it. It was El Chapo.
The story will continue after this.
Back in Mexico City, Tomas Zerón and his team were listening in real time as the high-stakes drama of Chapo's capture unfolded.
Was there cheering? Was there high-fiving?
La reacción fue de júbilo. No
Of
había
course
otra
it was a
forma
jubilee.
de manifestar
We
esta
felt at that
determinación.
point that we were all one,
Y hoy,
that we were all
cuando
doing something to have a
recuerdo
good
todo ese
Mexico.
momento,
We did not ever anticipate that he'd be captured alive. We thought he'd fight to the death.
Were you surprised that he didn't?
I was surprised.
I was shocked,
Shocked.
absolutely shocked.
What shocked you more? That he was captured or that he was captured without a shot?
Both. Captured without a shot was pretty amazing.
The once mighty drug lord who terrorized Mexico and outfoxed his pursuers for 13 years was defeated. Processed like any common criminal, Guzman was fingerprinted, mugshots taken. Then he was paraded before the press like a trophy and loaded onto a helicopter. Looking dazed, scared, and docile, El Chapo was flown to Altiplano Prison, Mexico's supermax. Law enforcement officials vow he will never escape again.
The Sinaloa cartel is still in business. It's still deeply involved in drug trafficking. So Guzman is now gone, but has anything really changed?
El cártel sigue trabajando.
The cartel continues. But even though it continues, we've made detentions after we detained Guzman.
En donde nosotros seguimos investigando.
We are not going to leave Sinaloa, and we are going to stay there until we dismantle the cartel completely.
We know that when you take out bin Laden, that the threat of terrorism did not end. Nor will the threat of drugs end by taking out El Chapo. But it was still worth every bit of effort to take that man off, because it sends a signal that you are touchable.